return to sanity. And return to sanity is impossible without the destruction of sorrow. So what stands on the way is thought construct and nothing else. What stands on the way, one way or another, it's only that thought construct. Vikalpa. These are the basics, fundamentals. What do we speak about now? Do we tweak the theme? Do we add to it? Instead, somehow it feels, to me, at least now, that we should be back to basics. Back to basics. Fundamentals. So, let's just make it really as concise, as simple, as direct as it is really possible. So, if we are to speak about this, so what this then whole ordeal is all about, why, what is it for, why are we doing it in the first place, what's the propensity, what's the driving force, what's the impetus, what's the incentive, and it could be summarized simply as destruction of sorrow. It's destruction of sorrow. The whole thing is to end suffering. That's how it is viewed, and it is viewed that in perennial traditions throughout. There's no such thing like some traditions suddenly come up with dismissing this. No, because if we truly experience happiness, if we truly experience equanimity, peace, harmony, beatitude, and all these qualities that are at the foundational ground of who we are, then this work is not necessary. In fact, this work is not only unnecessary, it's a waste of time. We could be doing something else. See? So this is the basics. This is forget about the Dharma, forget about holding that mountain with Krishna, forget about that saving the humanity, saving yourself, just that. Maybe saving yourself stays here. It's a destruction of sorrow. What causes sorrow? What causes this deep discontent? Because when that is achieved, then that what, by virtue of its being the ground, the substratum, simply is being experienced for what it is, lived. So it's not like destruction of sorrow, and once we distracted the sorrow, we then add something into it to compensate for what the sorrow took or robbed us of. No, it's self-evident. It simply rises up. It simply rises and experience for what it is, each and every one of us, for what it is. And the best test is, the best, simplest test, is when there is no object-based happiness or contentment or joy. There's nothing in our life that we can say, why am I happy? Why am I jovial? Why am I this and that? Not reason-based, not object-based. It's simply self-generating, self-evident, on the account of its being there at all times. Barely touching it, and it's like bubbles with that sense of that just joie de vivre, as the French say. It just bubbles to the surface as that incredible lightness of being. Don't get me wrong, just quickly. No, we will still have all the buttons, when pushed, respond the way the buttons respond. These buttons, that button, whatever, whoever wants to push our buttons, be my guest, you know. You push that button, you'll get the... Goes without saying. Nobody making saints here. It's not a saint factory. No, it's simply being sane. Simply return to sanity. The original meaning of the term saint. Return to sanity. And return to sanity is impossible without the destruction of sorrow. So what stands on the way is thought construct and nothing else. What stands on the way, one way or another, it's only that thought construct. Vikalpa. These are the basics, fundamentals. So when vikalpa is knocked down, loosened up first, of course, loosened. Because if it's like scaffolding, obstructs the beauty of this temple. Scaffolding, it's trying to support the temple that stands on its own. It's completely and utterly, fundamentally, with its foundations rooted in being. And suddenly this scaffolding. And have you seen the guys when they do this work? Have you? The big scaffoldings I'm talking about, serious scaffoldings. Have you seen what they do? Almost like in the airplane industry. The one guy goes and tightens the bolts, and right after him follows another guy who does the check that all bolts are tightened. It's not enough just one guy, because the guys will risk their life. They will be up there at the top of the scaffolding. So it's like tighten, tough, strong guys. Another guy comes in, not going to take it for granted. Each bolt tightened further. So this whole construction, thought construct, is constantly tightened by us. And then another guy within us comes, this guy of that, and like, I'm tightening it further, So I'm safe up there. See? This is why the sages throughout the time immemorial were simply pointing out to that. Whatever the language, Sanskrit, English, French, Chinese, Hebrew, Arabic, whatever the language is, Zuli, thought construct is what holds everything together. You can knock off that structure, and you can see how it begins to rattle. Once it's loosened up, it begins to rattle. It no longer feels as tight. And this is the time when to knock it down. There's no need. When this structure collapses, this structure of the thought construct, yes, it is accompanied by sense of certain inadequacy, insecurity, certain loss of that generated tight sense of self. And this is where the common sense comes in. This is where the teachings comes in. This is where a proper inference comes in. This is where we do not take things for granted. See? We move away when this thought construct collapses. We don't want to stand under the scaffoldings. Let the thought construct crumbles down. Stand away and watch that. Because by then, hopefully, you understood that whilst knocking down the vikalpa, once the vikalpa needs to be brought down, the positive vikalpa is already being generated. So for every negative thought, for every negative whatever that, what undermines us continuously and constantly, an opposite of that is already introduced. The opposite of that is already implemented. So all that identity with the temporal, with the ephemeral, with the passing, with the needs to be looked attentively and replaced with the universal, the eternal, the infinite. Even if it still feels in the form of a concept. Because guess what? The vikalpa of identity with the body, mind, senses is only an intellectual concept. but it is familiar one. So therefore we hold on to it. So to override that, something else needs to be introduced. This is where the reminder comes in. So if my identity here is constantly reinforced, and then I'm reinforcing it with these patterns that formed by these thought constructs, how on earth can I ever experience freedom? How on earth can I ever know myself? So this is the balancing act. This is how to see things clearly from the basic perspective. Because we do not bring anything that is required to be happy. Every little single joy that is experienced, let's say, from the objective sphere of existence, is a consolation in the first place. But once that ground of being is touched and experienced for what it is, then everything is icing on the cake. Everything is icing on the cake. You get what you want, icing on the cake. You don't get what you want, I don't need it. You get what you want, icing on the cake. You don't get what you want, I'm happy. What do they call it? A win-win situation. So it's like you're not in a loss, you're not losing anything because you have nothing to lose. Why? Because you have nothing to gain. You are as wealthy as the entire creation. You have no enough pockets in your garments to carry the wealth in the highest degree of its, whatever that carats measurement. It's not even diamonds. Diamonds are gone. Diamonds are like sand. We're talking about rubies this size. This size, like this size of rubies, the price, I don't know, like GDP of the entire country. All that eternity. And then it's like all for the exchange for the trifles, bunch of spinaches. And then the whole palaver begins. So of course, thought construct is here, is what gives this continued and constant, what supports it all. So unless it is dismantled, it is impossible to know oneself for what one is, and it's nothing to do with ego. It's nothing to do. It's to do with what thought construct is rest upon, based on. And for that, perhaps the most important discourse was given in the nature of the vowels and consonants. It's the language. Because thought construct doesn't exist outside of the language. We think only in terms of language. The thought itself exists only because of the language. The genius of Wittgenstein, remember? The philosopher who brought it all to question. Spectacular, stumbling, extraordinary insight. I do not speak language. Language speaks through me. In fact, language speaks me. Because it's Wittgenstein, a German philosopher. The boundaries of my imagination, are the boundaries of the universe. And it's all based on language. So this also is to point clearly the connection between the thought construct and what holds it all together. The language holds it all together. The language. language, the domain of the power of self-awareness, Shakti, tantrically speaking now. That power is what holds it all together. So this is why tantric sadhana could be considered as the most effective and direct, because this is what it works with. It works with Shakti. And that what does the work is Shakti. What about self-realization? What about enlightenment? Let's revisit that again. It's subtle, very subtle, quicksilver-like, quantum. Know thyself was written on the oracle at Delphi. Remember? The oracle of Apollo. Know thyself. It's a paradoxical statement. It's the motto and leitmotif of all perennial traditions, all of them without exception. All. Whatever the origin, whatever the provenance, geographically, culturally, it's that. Know thyself. But how can you know that by virtue of which everything else is known, as the Upanishad declares? Know that by virtue of which everything else is known. How can that be? How can Noah know itself, or himself, herself? How can Noah know itself? There's only one and only Noah. And all that what is known is possible only because the known is the knower. The knower is the known. The subject is the object. The seer and the seen are one and the same reality in the modality. Which is required for the knower to know. Otherwise, how can the knower know itself? Reflect on this, please. Don't take it for granted. Knower cannot be known. Why? Because to know, instrument of knowledge is required. To know, the instrumentality of knowledge is required. Knower cannot know itself. Otherwise, we would have to reduce that ad infinitum. There would be a knower who knows the knower. And then what about that knower who knows? So therefore, this is why it is paradoxical and quantum. Knower cannot be known. That is a proper inference when it comes to the ultimate state of affairs. This is back to basics. The first step equals the last. The knower can never be known. So, from the perennial perspective of Advaita, there is no such thing as enlightenment, because there is no ignorance. There is only knower of reality. enlightenment and the lack of thereof are but concepts in the domain of the language. Positive vikalpa, but still, nevertheless, a vikalpa. So how is it possible then? This is the genius of the Trika Shaivism. This is the extraordinary insight. This is where the secret supreme, as they call it, as they refer to it. For the knower to know, the instrumentality is required. The instrumentality by virtue of which something can be known, hence the split. And this body, senses, mind, is the instrumentality. So obviously body, mind, senses cannot know the knower, because they are themselves already the known. The whole world is the known, the perceived. The whole world is for the sake of the knower, the seer. So the quantum relationship here is in that. That what here is the highest price. That what here is where the knower conceals himself. Is where the possibility of knowing is given from behind the scenes. One can never know awareness, because awareness is the only knower. The only knower. It does only one thing, knows. And that's what we do. Everything that we experience is on the account of knowing it. It doesn't matter what sphere it falls into now, what sphere of polarities of nature and quality of experiences. The one thing here is constant is the knower. And the knower conceals himself in the known. So the only way to know thyself, the only way to know that which, or that by virtue of which everything is known, Can you finish that line yourself? That's all there is. You want to see your face, and the only way to see your face is to see its reflection. Bimba pratibimba, we spoke about that. You look at yourself in the mirror and you see the reflection. that reflection, I am and I am not. You're seeing yourself in the mirror of this world of forms and phenomena. This is by virtue of Namarupa, sounds, the union of sounds, of the name and form. You behold yourself. You behold yourself in that mirror. Is it you in the mirror? Or your reflection? That's where the affair is settled. So according this, what the Trika Shaivism has as that highest understanding, the only way to know thyself is through the experience, because that's is the only way to know in the first place. Instrumentality. For the process of knowing to take place, the instrumentality is required. This is the way it is concealed and revealed to itself from the behind the scenes. This is the rehabilitation of the phenomenal nature of reality. This is why, from the point of view of Kashmir Shaivism, this world, universe, and all its experiences is the reality of Shiva. It's not an epiphenomenon, it's not a transmigratory, transitory, ephemeral, illusory, it's the body of Shiva. Therefore, analogy is given, so we live in the body of God as God. This universe is the body of Godhead. This universe is the absolute awareness made manifest. This is the end of duality. This is the end of high and low, the end of spirit and matter, finite or infinite, absolute or relative. All this collapses onto itself. Because all this is in the domain of the language, in the domain of the vikalpa. All these are concepts, frequencies, vibrations of Shakti. That's the Socrates, I know nothing. So is reality knowable or not? There's no answer. No is already following one of. Yes, following one of. Falling into one of the extremes. Is reality knowable? Yes and no. Or no answer. It's simple. The simplest inference here, to repeat ourselves. In order to know, the instrumentality is required. Knower alone cannot know. What would he know? Hence that, what is exemplified here by that unique triadic relationship. Knower, knowing, known. Seer, seeing, seen. This is the instrumentality, or these are the instrumentality of how the knower can know anything. In this case, how the knower can know thyself. How can know and know itself. So, we could also simplify it further, very simple. So this whole universe, totality of it, is nothing other than knower knowing itself. Where do you find yourself here? Is only a matter of perception. So, these are the basics, the fundamentals, the first step, the last step. The rest is giving various ways of approaching it with the language where we are constantly at the mercy of its limitation. And deep down, whenever that is touched, it is accompanied by this even tactile, visceral sense that is impossible to relate, impossible to convey. We may come to that through understanding, or we may stumble on that through whatever means there are. But when that knowledge rises on its own, when that cognition takes place, it is always beyond the modality of know and known. And that direct cognition takes place is when the fusion of the three reabsorbed into that for which there's no word, no term, no concept, no feeling. Why? Because for that, what we just enumerated, instrumentality is required, modalities are required. See? Modalities are required. When these modalities are fused, what can be said about it? That's the Wittgenstein's extraordinary enunciation. I don't know if I'm paraphrasing it accurately or not enough, but the boundaries of my imagination, the boundaries of the language. We can only imagine that what is in the domain of the language. Try to imagine what doesn't exist. That's why, from that point of view, nothing is never ever invented. It is humbling, even on a mundane level. So, know that and be free. We can never make one single move which is not in the direction of that who we are. Just like in the sphere. In the sphere, every movement of its circumference forever drawn to the center. So this is the non-dual discourse. This is the Advaita perspective. This is the relationship between the knower, knowing, and the known. And our body is the instrumentality. So it is the paradox. We are the walking paradox. It is through the instrumentality that we literally here act as that instrument of knowing for one and the only knower, awareness. And at the same time, on the account of being that, is where awareness is concealed from itself. You see? This is why also is true in that plain language, is that nothing leads to self-realization, nothing leads to enlightenment. We cannot speak about it in terms of cause and effect. Nothing causes it from the Advaita point of view. When the concession is given, we can speak about the grace, we can speak about transmission, spiritual practices, blah, blah. Yes, by all means. But you want to hear it? That's the truth. Because it's causeless. So that takes us back to the greatest joy is causeless. The greatest sense of peace is causeless. Whatever is there that we experience and savor that is not supported by the objects of our experience got to be causeless. Reflect on this, please. This is correct inference. When that spot is touched, now practically speaking, when that spot is touched, you're whirling with the dervishes. You join the assembly of the mystics. You're dancing with angels. You're spinning it all like this. Everything then comes and goes. Sometimes we are fascinated, at other times we're bored. Nothing is added into us, nothing is taken away. So it's a freedom to simply be as we are, because that's what we are. That's what I am. We can speak about it concession in a consents kind of descending order of approaching it. Beingness as a gift. But it's not a gift. It's never given. And nobody can take it away. So, why we don't experience it? You know why. You know why. What holds this all in arrested state is the power of thought construct. That's the power of thought construct, the power of Shakti that holds the letters, phonemes, and consonants, vowels, all this intact. And everything is reinforced by virtue of the grammar, the way of the language, the way of the speech. So, we have said we're going to start relaxing in leaning with these examples of Ramana Maharshi, and I will allow myself one more quote, one more example, because it's simply fitting. When Ramana Maharshi was asked, at what point the sadhana ends, at what point the work ends, at what point any effort ends, and his response is very direct and simple. Up until vikalpa is intact, the work should continue. Because vikalpa is a thought construct, it's those, what we spoke of as scaffoldings, that holds it all together. So freedom is impossible without freedom from language, the domain of the language, which one and sole support of all the thought construct in turn. All these bolts, all this what is the parts of that scaffolding structure is made out of words, sounds, syllables. And that's another reminder to the discourse on the importance of that. What stands on the way of our self-realization, of our happiness and bliss. Nothing to do with ego, it's to do with the language itself. Hence the science of matrika. So when we go beneath the domain of the language, that's the mastery. By hook or by crook. We can then witness clearly even the way the thought rises, where the thought rises. And there is another analogy traditionally given. One single thought rises and it's like a long train of thoughts. When is it end? My gods. 1, 2, 3, 4. 28, 50 carriages. One thought ends immediately jumping onto the next, and that ends immediately jumping onto the next. See? That's why in Kashmir Shaivism and also in Advaita Vedanta this is routinely spoken of as a practice. When we are amidst of a thought unfolding, we can't arrest that. It's impossible. It has the power of the train. But soon as the thought ends, reject the temptation to pick up the following thought and allow yourself to fall into the gap. When we fail to do that, we are taken for a ride. We are taken for the ride, and then the conductor comes. Where's your ticket? I'm sorry, I didn't know you have to pay. Penalty. And where are you going anyway? Are you out of your mind? Oh, sorry. Tough. So, these are the basics. This is back to basics. Okay? Back to basics. You can entitle this whole thing is what prevents all this from the experience of freedom, as that thought construct, as that vikalpa. The relationship of the know and the known. Speaking of self-realization and enlightenment, know thyself. And where we have started, the destruction of sorrow. Because when that is achieved, every quality arises on its own because it is self-evident and because it is foundational to the very, very core of who we are. Peace, bliss, equanimity, beatitude are not added qualities. These are the foundational qualities of who we are. They simply then shine forth on their own accord. Just like the windows when they're clean from all the muck. Just like whatever else analogy you may come up with. Feel free. That's how it works. So you can see the philosophy is to introduce the possibility for creating the vikalpa which is conducive to and acts towards, rather than being arrested by the ordinary thought processes, which always cages us. And then variety of reasons, because that's in scaffoldings, everything dependent on every pole. What makes it strong is because it's many poles put together, parallel, vertical, this, to reinforce it, then diagonal so it doesn't shut, doesn't rattle. See, diagonal is very important. Without the diagonal, it's still loose. Then this diagonal, cross-like, solid. This is we go through life like a bulldozer. We bulldozing ourselves and others because this is, we're equipped with our truth, with our righteousness, with our everything. Hence, laconic response by Ramana Maharshi. The work continues until Vikalpa is there. And the first sign of loosening of the Vikalpa, and it's known to all of you, known. When language doesn't hold sway, doesn't impose, then we don't need to have remembrance. We don't need to have prayer. We don't need to call the prayer to prayer. It's self-evident. Self-evident. When the ground of being is touched, we forget everything else. We simply are in the fullest presence of what this moment presents itself. That's all there is to it. We might have, like, when that kind of maybe wanes somehow, and some, oh wow, that was awesome. And there's no reason why. Like, I can't name one reason why is it awesome. Just great. It's lovely. And then, we, of course, we jump onto Vikalpa. It's because of this, because I'm doing great, and the sun is shining, and this is the, or the rain is pouring, and this, and there's a windfall, and there's a partner, and there is this, and there, you know, and children doing good, and you know, and I'm really, really like, it's like, my God, just give me break. Like justifying everything constantly back into tightening the bolts again. That second guy comes in, did you tie it this well? I'm not asking you, I'm going to check anyway. So this is also an invitation to recognize these states and revel in them. Revel in them. That also belongs to the tradition of contemplation. Contemplation is not thinking about it. Simply being in a receptive state, state of full receptivity, fully present to what is, whatever that is. A prison cell, or your own island in somewhere where only the movers and shakers buy these islands. Extremes, right? Extremes. Reverse, one is imprisoned on the island, free in the cell. The reality of the situation. This is not made up. Accounts of people were speaking about that. They have true, authentic, not just glimpses, confirmation of that freedom, where records it with profound insight and accuracy. So I thought to speak about this in loosely, that kind of title, Back to Basics. Okay?